You think you're in control. You wake up. You check your phone. Someone said something that bothers you. You respond immediately. You're hungry. You eat. You're bored. You scroll. You're anxious. You move. Every single day, you mistake reaction for action. You mistake motion for progress. And you call it living. But here's what you don't see. Every time you move without pause, you're not expressing freedom. You're expressing slavery. Slavery to impulse. Slavery to the part of your brain that was designed to keep you alive in a world that no longer exists. Self-mastery isn't about discipline in the way most people think. It's not about forcing yourself to do hard things. It's about something far more difficult. It's about doing nothing when everything inside you screams to do something. Pause. That's it. That's the entire game. But you can't, and that's the problem. Right now, as you're listening to this, you probably feel the urge to skip ahead, to check a notification, to think about something else. That urge? That's not you. That's a mechanism, a very old one, and it's running your life. The human brain operates on a simple principle: reduce uncertainty. When something happens, your brain wants resolution. Immediately. It doesn't matter if the resolution is good or bad. It just wants the loop closed. Someone insults you. Your brain doesn't want you to think about it. It wants you to respond. Fire back. Defend. Close the loop. You see food. Your brain doesn't want you to consider if you're actually hungry. It wants you to eat. Close the loop. You feel uncomfortable. Your brain doesn't want you to sit with that feeling. It wants you to move, distract, consume, anything. Just close the loop. This is the tyranny of impulse, and most people never escape it. They spend their entire lives as passengers in their own bodies, watching themselves react, convinced they're choosing. They're not. The gap between stimulus and response, that's where everything lives. That's where you actually exist. But you've never been there. Not really. Because you've never paused long enough to find it. Viktor Frankl said it. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. But he didn't tell you how small that space is, how fast it closes, how much of your life happens in the milliseconds before you even realize you're reacting. You think you decide to get angry. You don't. You get angry, and then you justify it. You think you decide to eat that thing. You don't. You eat it, and then you explain why it was okay. You think you decide to send that message. You don't. You send it, and then you rationalize it. The decision happens in a place you can't see, in the gap you've never learned to inhabit, and this is why self-mastery feels impossible. Because you're trying to control the reaction. But by the time you're aware of the reaction, it's already happened. You're always late to your own life. The only way out is to get there earlier, to catch the impulse before it becomes action, to pause in the space that most people don't even know exists. But this requires something uncomfortable. It requires you to sit with the tension of an unclosed loop, to feel the urge and not satisfy it, to let the discomfort exist without resolving it. And your brain hates this, genuinely hates it, because from your brain's perspective, an unclosed loop is a threat. It's unfinished business. It's danger. This is why distraction is so powerful. This is why you can't sit still. This is why meditation feels like torture for most people, because you're fighting against millions of years of evolutionary programming that says, do something, anything. Just don't sit here with this feeling. But here's the truth that no one tells you. The discomfort of the pause is temporary. The consequences of the reaction are permanent. You send the angry message. You can't unsend it. You eat the thing you didn't need. You can't uneat it. You make the impulsive decision. You can't unmake it. The pause costs you seconds. The reaction costs you everything. And still, you choose the reaction. Every single time. Because it feels like relief. It feels like control. But it's not. It's surrender. Think about the last time you did something you regretted. Not a big thing. Just a small thing. You said something you shouldn't have. You bought something you didn't need. You stayed up when you meant to sleep. You checked something you meant to ignore. Now think about the moment before you did it. There was a moment. There's always a moment. A split second where you could have paused. Where you could have asked, do I actually want to do this? Or do I just want to close this loop? But you didn't ask. You just moved. And then you regretted it. This is the pattern. This is the cycle. This is your life. Impulse, motion, regret, repeat. And you call it being human. You call it being spontaneous. You call it living in the moment. But really, you're just being controlled by the oldest, dumbest part of your brain. The part that doesn't know the difference between a lion and a text message. The part that treats every uncomfortable feeling like a life or death emergency. Now let's go deeper. Because this isn't just about resisting temptation. This is about something more fundamental. This is about who's actually in charge. Most people, when they think about self-control, they think about willpower. They think it's about being strong enough to resist. But that's not how it works. Willpower is a limited resource. It runs out. And when it runs out, the impulse wins. Self-mastery isn't about willpower. It's about awareness. It's about seeing the impulse for what it is. Just a signal, not a command, not a truth, just information. When you're hungry, you feel hunger. But hunger is not a command to eat. It's information that your body wants food. You can acknowledge it. You can sit with it. You can decide what to do with it. When you're angry, you feel anger. But anger is not a command to lash out. It's information that something violated your expectations. You can acknowledge it. You can sit with it. You can decide what to do with it. The impulse is just a sensation, but you've been taught to treat it like an order. And so you obey, without question, without pause. This is the deepest form of slavery. Because the chains are invisible. The master is you. And you don't even know you're imprisoned. Let me tell you what happens when you start to pause. When you actually practice this. When you feel the impulse and choose to wait. At first, it's excruciating. The tension builds. The urge intensifies. Your brain starts screaming. Do something. Fix this. Close the loop. And you sit there. And you watch it. And you do nothing. And then something incredible happens. The urge peaks. And then it fades. Not immediately. Not quickly. But it fades. Because urges always fade. They have to. They're not sustainable. They're just neurological fireworks. Bright and loud and temporary. But most people never see this. Because they react before the urge has a chance to fade. They close the loop. They get the relief. And they reinforce the pattern. Every time you react to an impulse, you train your brain that this impulse requires immediate action. You make it stronger. You make it faster. You make it harder to resist next time. But every time you pause, you train your brain that this impulse is just noise. You make it weaker. You make it slower. You make it easier to resist next time. This is how you reclaim control. Not by forcing yourself to be different, but by teaching your brain that you are not its servant. You are the one who decides. Not the impulse, not the urge, not the emotion. You. But this only works if you practice. If you actually pause. Not just when it's easy. Not just when you feel like it. But especially when you don't want to. Especially when the urge is strong. Because that's when the training happens. That's when you're actually rewiring the system. Think about this. Every impulse you've ever had made sense in the moment. Your brain gave you a reason, a justification, a story about why you needed to act right now. You needed to respond to that message immediately because it was important. You needed to eat that food immediately because you were hungry. You needed to buy that thing immediately because it was on sale. You needed to say that thing immediately because you were right. But were any of those true? Or did your brain just construct a narrative to justify the impulse it already decided to follow? This is the trick. This is the con. Your brain is not giving you reasons. It's giving you rationalizations. After the fact. After the decision has already been made in the unconscious. You are a lawyer defending a client you didn't choose, and the client is your impulse, and you're very good at it. You're so good that you've convinced yourself you're in control, that you're making rational decisions, that you're choosing, but you're not. You're justifying. And there's a difference. Real choice happens in the pause, in the moment before the impulse becomes action, in the space where you can actually see what's happening and decide if this is what you want, not what your brain wants, not what the impulse wants, what you want. But to get there, you have to slow down. You have to create space. You have to pause. And this is harder than it sounds, because life is designed to prevent pausing. Everything around you is optimized for immediate reaction. Notifications, alerts, deadlines, demands. Everything wants you to move. Now. Faster. Without thinking. Because the world benefits from your reaction, your attention, your compliance, your consumption. The world does not benefit from your pause, from your consideration, from your control. So it will punish you for pausing. It will make you feel like you're falling behind, like you're missing out, like you're being left behind. But here's what it won't tell you. The people who pause are the ones who win. Not in the obvious ways, not in the ways that show up on social media, but in the ways that matter. They make better decisions. They have fewer regrets. They control their lives instead of being controlled. They're not smarter. They're not stronger. They're just slower. In the right way. At the right time. They've learned the secret that most people never learn. Speed is not power. Pause is power. The ability to feel the urge and wait. To see the impulse and choose. To inhabit the gap between what happens to you and what you do about it. This is self-mastery. Not the Instagram version. Not the motivational poster version. The real version. The version that's quiet and unglamorous and invisible to everyone except you. Now let's talk about what this actually looks like. Because theory is useless without practice. You're in a conversation. Someone says something that bothers you. You feel the heat rising, the urge to respond, to correct, to defend, to attack. Pause. Not because you're weak, not because you're scared, but because you're strong enough to wait, to let the heat rise and fall without acting on it. You watch the urge, you acknowledge it, you don't judge it, you just see it, and you wait, and maybe after 10 seconds you respond. But now your response comes from you, not from the impulse, not from the heat, from you. Or maybe you don't respond at all, because you realize the impulse was just ego, just defensiveness, just noise. Either way, you chose, and that's the difference. You're scrolling. You see something that triggers you, something that makes you angry, something that demands a response. Pause. Not because you don't care, but because you care enough to choose how you engage, to decide if this is worth your energy, your attention, your peace. You watch the trigger, you feel the pull, and you decide. Maybe you engage, but consciously, deliberately, on your terms. Or maybe you keep scrolling, because you realize this isn't your fight, this isn't your circus, this isn't worth the cost. Either way, you chose. You're hungry. You see food. You want it. Pause. Are you actually hungry? Or are you bored? Anxious? Tired? Avoiding something? You ask the question. You wait for the answer. And then you decide. Maybe you eat, but because you're hungry, not because the impulse demanded it. Or maybe you don't eat, because you realize you were just trying to fill a different emptiness. Either way, you chose. This is the practice. This is the work. Every single day. In every single moment, catching the impulse before it catches you. And it's exhausting at first, because you've never done this before. You've spent your entire life on autopilot, and now you're trying to fly manual. Every impulse feels like an emergency. Every urge feels like a crisis. Your brain is not happy with this new arrangement, but you keep practicing. You keep pausing, and slowly, something shifts. The impulses don't go away, but they lose their power. They become suggestions instead of commands, information instead of orders. And you start to notice something else. The space gets bigger, the gap between stimulus and response. It expands. What used to be milliseconds becomes seconds. What used to feel impossible becomes manageable. You start to live in that space, to inhabit it, to make it your home. And from there, everything changes. Because now you're not reacting to life. You're responding to it. There's a difference. Reacting is automatic, unconscious, controlled. Responding is deliberate, conscious, free. Most people spend their entire lives reacting, and they wonder why they feel powerless, why they feel out of control, why they feel like life is happening to them. It's because it is. Because they've never learned to pause, to inhabit the gap, to choose. They're passengers, and they don't even know it. But you can be different. You can learn this. You can practice this. You can become the kind of person who pauses when every impulse demands motion. Not because you're special, not because you're gifted, but because you're willing to do the work that most people aren't. The work of sitting with discomfort, of letting urges fade, of choosing slowly when the world demands speed. This is not sexy. This is not exciting. This is not the kind of thing that gets likes or followers or applause. But this is freedom. Real freedom. Not the freedom to do whatever you want. The freedom to choose what you want. To separate signal from noise. To be the author of your own life. And that's worth more than anything else. More than success. More than recognition. More than comfort. Because without it, nothing else matters. Without self-mastery, you're just a puppet. A very sophisticated puppet. But a puppet nonetheless. The strings are invisible. The puppet master is unconscious. But the show goes on. Day after day. Year after year. Until one day you wake up and realize you've lived someone else's life. Someone else's choices. Someone else's impulses. But it was supposed to be yours. This is the cost of never pausing. This is the price of constant motion. You get to the end and realize you were never really there. You were always somewhere else, always on to the next thing, always reacting, always moving, never choosing, never present, never free. So pause, right now. Feel the urge to keep listening, to keep consuming, to keep moving, and just sit with it, for a moment, without satisfying it. Notice what happens. Notice how your brain reacts. Notice the discomfort, the tension, the pull, and then notice how it fades, how it's not actually an emergency, how you're okay, how you're still here. This is the practice. This is the path. This is self-mastery, not in grand gestures, not in heroic acts, but in these small moments, these quiet choices, these invisible pauses that no one sees but you. This is where your life is won or lost, not in the big decisions, but in the 1,000 tiny ones, the ones where you choose to pause instead of react, to wait instead of move, to inhabit the gap instead of closing the loop. Every impulse is a test. Every urge is a choice. Every moment is an opportunity to reclaim yourself, or to surrender again. to the oldest, dumbest part of your brain, to the mechanism that doesn't know who you are or what you want, to the pattern that's been running since before you were born. The choice is yours, but only if you pause long enough to make it.